Let me start with something simple. You woke up this morning believing certain things about the world. You believe certain countries are good, certain people are dangerous, certain ideas are ridiculous, and certain questions are off limits. And most of the time you don't remember choosing those beliefs. They feel obvious, they feel like common sense, they feel yours. Now here's the uncomfortable question, and I want you to actually sit with it for a second. What if some of the beliefs you are most emotionally attached to are the ones you examined the least? What if your certainty isn't proof of truth, but evidence of conditioning? And by the end of this episode, you are not going to be told what to think. You're going to understand how thinking itself gets shaped. This isn't about distrusting everything. It isn't about rejecting reality. And it isn't about pretending you're immune. It's about understanding how influence works when it's subtle, institutional, and invisible. Because the most effective control doesn't feel like control. It feels like your own conclusion. Today we're talking about Operation Mockingbird, a real historically documented intelligence program that forces us to ask a much bigger question. If governments have influenced media before, why would we assume they've stopped now? When most people think about power, they imagine force. Armies, police, weapons, violence. But force is crude. Force creates resistance. Force exposes itself. Force makes people look closer. Real power is quieter. Real power works upstream, before action, before resistance, before thought. Because if you can control perception, you don't need to control behaviour directly. Let me put it simply. If you control what people see, you influence what people think. If you influence what they think, you influence how they feel. If you influence how they feel, you influence how they act. This is how and why advertising works. This is why political messaging works. This is why propaganda has existed for thousands of years. But modern propaganda doesn't announce itself. It doesn't say, this is propaganda. It says, this is news. This is expert consensus. This is what responsible people believe. And once something becomes consensus, questioning it feels antisocial. And that's the real power. To understand Operation Mockingbird, you have to understand the psychological state of the world after World War II. Europe is destroyed, tens of millions dead, atomic weapons now exist, and almost immediately a new enemy emerges. Not a country, an idea. Communism. To American policymakers at the time, communism wasn't just another system. It's seen as expansionist, ideological, and infectious. And here's the key insight intelligence agencies arrived at. You cannot defeat an ideology with bombs alone. You have to defeat it in the minds of people. So the Cold War becomes a war of narratives, symbols, culture, and information. Hollywood matters, journalism matters, academia matters, radio matters, newspapers matter. Because whoever tells the story defines reality. The CIA was officially created in 1947, and contrary to popular belief, its mandate was never limited to spying. From the beginning, it included psychological operations, influence campaigns, disinformation abroad, narrative shaping. And very quickly, intelligence officials realise something crucial. The press is far more effective than the military at shaping long-term belief. A soldier can take territory, a journalism can take meaning. So the question becomes, how do you influence the media without appearing to control the media? Because open censorship would violate democratic principles, damage credibility, backfire politically. So instead, you do something much smarter. You embed influence. Operation Mockingbird was not a single memo or switch, it was a system. According to reporting that later emerged, particularly during the 1970s Church Committee investigations, the CIA had established relationships with hundreds of journalists worldwide. Not one newsroom, not one outlet, hundreds of individuals. Some knew they were cooperating, some believed they were just receiving helpful information, some didn't realise the source or intent at all. Influence took many forms, providing exclusive access, feeding story leads, suppressing certain topics, framing narratives in specific ways, encouraging repetition across outlets. And here's the important part, most of the stories weren't outright lies. They didn't have to be. They were selective truths. Because omission is often more powerful than deception. If the public never hears certain facts, they might as well not exist. Here's where people oversimplify this story. They imagine evil villains manipulating innocent journalists. Reality is more complicated and more disturbing. Many journalists involved believed they were doing the right thing. They believed communism was a genuine existential threat. Public panic would be dangerous. Stability mattered more than transparency. And that's how influence sustains itself. You don't need corrupt people. You need justified people. Once journalism and journalists stop seeing themselves as watchdogs, they start seeing themselves as partners of power. The role of the press fundamentally changes. It stops asking what is true and starts asking what is helpful. That shift alone changes everything. Now let's talk about why this worked. Your brain is not designed to pursue truth necessarily. It's designed to conserve energy and avoid threat. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates safety. Safety creates belief. When the same narrative appears on TV, in newspapers, from experts, from authority figures, your brain stops evaluating it. Not because you're stupid, but because that's how cognition works. Add emotion, fear, outrage, moral superiority, and critical thinking shuts down even faster. This is why propaganda always targets emotion first. A calm population questions, an emotional population reacts. Here's the part people don't want to hear. Operation Mockingbird didn't need to continue in the same form, because the system improved. Today, algorithms decide visibility. Engagement rewards outrage. Social pressure enforces conformity. No intelligence officer needs to call a newsroom. The system self-corrects. People who repeat dominant narratives are promoted, shared, monetized. People who challenge them are deplatformed, labelled, marginalised. The most efficient control system ever built is one where the public enforces it themselves. So what's the solution? Not paranoia, not rejecting everything, not doing your own research without standards. The solution is disciplined skepticism. Ask who benefits if I believe this? What emotion is being triggered? What perspective is missing? Am I reacting or reasoning? Mental sovereignty is the new freedom, because if you don't consciously shape how you think, you are living inside someone else's narrative. Operation Mockingbird matters, not because of what it proves about the past, but because of what it reveals about human nature. We are influenceable. We are pattern-seeking. We are emotional. Truth doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers and waits to be noticed. And freedom begins in the mind. And if you want freedom, understand how you're coerced. Think properly and think for yourself.